My name is Thomas, and I was just 10 years old when the strangeness truly began at Blackwood Academy. It was the autumn of 1908, a time when gas lamps still flickered on cobbled streets, and the whisper of progress hadn't quite reached our secluded corner of the countryside. Blackwood wasn't just any school, it was an institution, or so the brochures claimed, nestled deep within a thick ancient forest, its gray stone walls seemingly rising organically from the very earth itself. It had a reputation, not of academic brilliance, but of stern discipline and an almost monastic solitude. Boys were sent there mostly to be hardened, to learn Latin and Greek, and to forget whatever soft indulgences they might have known at home. My own parents, preoccupied with their ailing textile business, saw it as a practical solution, a place where I would be out of sight and, they hoped, out of trouble. The school grounds were vast, enclosed by a high, moss-covered wall that seemed to hum with an unseen energy, or perhaps that was just the wind through the pines. Inside, the main building was a sprawling Gothic structure, all pointed arches and narrow, leaded windows that let in precious little light. Corridors stretched endlessly, echoing with the soft scuff of our worn boots and the distant clang of the bells signaling lessons. The air always smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and something else. Something metallic and damp, like earth after a long rain. It wasn't a cheerful place, but then, cheer wasn't on the curriculum. Our teachers were a collection of austere men, mostly older, with spectacles perched on their noses and a perpetually tired look in their eyes. They were dedicated, in their own rigid way, to instilling knowledge and fear into our young minds. Mr. Abernathy, our mathematics tutor, was perhaps the most memorable. He was a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair that perpetually stood on end, giving him a bewildered appearance, though his mind was anything but. He had a peculiar habit of muttering complex equations to himself during morning assembly, his lips moving silently, oblivious to the hymns we were meant to be singing. He was strict, yes, but fair, and possessed a quiet wit that occasionally surfaced, much to the surprise of us boys. He lived on the school grounds like all the teachers, in a small, cramped apartment above the old library, filled, we imagined, with stacks of theorem-laden books. The first hint of the strange occurrences came not with a bang, but with an absence. One Tuesday morning, Mr. Abernathy wasn't in his usual spot at breakfast. This wasn't entirely unheard of. Some teachers occasionally had urgent business in town, though it was rare. But the next day he was still absent, and the day after that. The headmaster, a portly man named Mr. Thorne with a booming voice that usually preceded him, simply announced that Mr. Abernathy had been recalled to family matters, and that our maths lessons would be temporarily covered by a rotating roster of other teachers. No fuss, no explanation beyond that. We were boys, easily distracted. A temporary reprieve from Abernathy's dreaded calculus seemed more a blessing than a curse. We whispered amongst ourselves, concocting elaborate tales of his family matters. A long-lost inheritance, a sudden summons to decipher an ancient code, even a secret mission for the crown. The truth, we discovered much later, was far more mundane and infinitely more terrifying. But even as the novelty of substitute teachers wore off, a subtle unease began to settle over the school. Mr. Abernathy's apartment remained dark at night. His usually precise handwritten notes vanished from the common room board. His favorite battered copy of Euclid's Elements was gone from the classroom shelf, a detail only I, who often lingered after class, had noticed. The other teachers, while attempting to maintain an air of normalcy, seemed subtly agitated. Their conversations in the staff room, usually a low murmur, became punctuated by hushed tones and sudden silences when we passed. They looked tired, more so than usual, as if burdened by a secret. Days turned into weeks. Mr. Abernathy did not return. His family matters began to sound less like a temporary absence and more like a permanent void. Then came the second disappearance. This time, it was Miss Eleanor Croft, our history teacher. Miss Croft was a younger woman, only in her late 20s, with bright, curious eyes and a passion for ancient civilizations. She had a way of bringing dusty historical facts to life, making us feel as though we were standing alongside Caesar's legions or witnessing the construction of the pyramids. She was kind, a stark contrast to the sternness of the male faculty. Her vanishing was even more perplexing. She had been seen just the previous evening, walking in the rose garden near the main building, enjoying the fading light. She had even exchanged a few words with old Mr. Davies, the groundskeeper, about the unseasonably warm weather. Yet by morning, her bed in the small cottage she occupied by the edge of the woods was unslept in. Her teacup still sat on her bedside table, a half-finished book open beside it. This time, Mr. Thorne's announcement was more strained. Miss Croft, he declared, had been taken ill and sent home for recovery. The silence that followed this announcement in the great hall was different from before. It was a heavy, knowing silence. We weren't fooled. We'd seen Miss Croft the day before. She had been vibrant, full of life. Taken ill seemed a weak excuse. The boys, usually boisterous and prone to mischief, grew quiet. A ripple of genuine fear began to spread through the dormitories. 2 teachers gone just like that with no proper explanation. The authorities, represented by the local constable, Mr. O'Malley, made a perfunctory visit. He walked the grounds with Mr. Thorne, asked a few questions, nodded gravely, and left. There were no intensive searches, no detailed investigations, at least none that we, the students, were privy to. It was as if their disappearances were to be accepted, swept under the thick rug of the school's grim routine. But how could we accept it? We lived within these walls, under the watchful, now increasingly fearful eyes of the remaining faculty. The metallic, damp smell in the air seemed to grow stronger, or perhaps it was just my imagination, heightened by the gnawing anxiety. I found myself staring out of the classroom windows more often, scanning the dense, dark tree line of the Blackwood forest, wondering if the answer lay there, hidden amongst the gnarled roots and whispering leaves. I began to pay closer attention to everything. The way the shadows stretched long and thin in the late afternoon, making the school look like a skeletal hand clutching at the sky. The way the wind would sometimes whistle through a broken pane in the old bell tower, sounding uncannily like a mournful sigh. Even the school cook, a perpetually grumpy woman named Mrs. Henderson, seemed to move with a new, hesitant slowness, her usual loud clatter of pots replaced by a quiet, almost fearful shuffle. The other teachers, especially Mr. Finch, the Latin master, became increasingly withdrawn. Mr. Finch, a man who usually delighted in tormenting us with verb conjugations, now barely lifted his gaze from his desk. His hand, which usually rapped smartly on our knuckles for grammatical errors, now trembled faintly as he held his chalk. He would often stare blankly into space during class, his eyes distant, as if seeing something none of us could perceive. His hair, already thin, seemed to recede further, and his face took on a grayish pallor. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Who would be next? And why were they vanishing? The official explanations were flimsy, insulting to our intelligence even as children. We knew with the chilling certainty only innocence can possess that something deeply wrong was happening at Blackwood Academy, and it was only just beginning. The fear, once a whisper, began to solidify into a tangible presence. It clung to the damp stone walls, seeped into the thin, scratchy blankets in our dormitories, and even seemed to mute the natural exuberance of boyhood. Our usual games of football in the muddy yard became less spirited. Laughter was rarer, replaced by hushed conversations and the constant, nervous darting of eyes. Everyone, from the youngest new boy to the oldest, soon to be graduating prefect, felt it. Mr. Abernathy and Miss Croft were gone, truly gone, and no one knew why or how. The remaining teachers, though they tried to present a united front of calm, were clearly crumbling under the strain. Mr. Finch, the Latin master, became almost a ghost of his former self. His classes, once a rigorous drill of declensions and conjugations, devolved into disjointed ramblings about ancient curses and forgotten deities. He would trace strange symbols on the blackboard with trembling chalk, then quickly erase them when he caught one of us staring. His meals in the dining hall became solitary affairs. He would pick at his food, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting to see something that wasn't there. Then there was Mr. Silas, our stoic head of English. Literature. Mr. Silas was a man of precise habits, his silver-rimmed spectacles always gleaming, his suits impeccably pressed. He had a booming, theatrical voice that could bring Shakespeare to life, and a razor-sharp wit that could cut you down to size with a single, perfectly aimed phrase. But even Mr. Silas began to falter. He started forgetting names, even those of boys he had taught for years. His meticulously prepared lessons would sometimes end abruptly, mid-sentence, as he would simply stare out the window, a faraway look in his usually intense eyes. One evening I heard him pacing late into the night in his rooms below mine, the rhythmic creak of the floorboards a tormenting counterpoint to my own restless thoughts. The school's routine, which had always been its unyielding backbone, started to fray. Meals became quieter. The quality of the food deteriorated. Mrs. Henderson, the cook, seemed less concerned with culinary standards and more with her own anxious hum. Our study hours, once strictly enforced, grew lax, as the teachers, distracted and worried, would frequently leave us unsupervised. It was during these unsupervised hours that the boys, freed from immediate scrutiny, began to band together, sharing theories and fears. A group of us, led by the bolder, older boys like William and Edward, started conducting our own clandestine investigations. We explored the parts of the school usually forbidden to us, the dusty attic with its skeletal rafters, the echoing cellars where a thick, earthy smell permeated the air, even the disused wing that had been closed off for years. We found nothing obvious, no hidden passages, no secret compartments, only dust, cobwebs, and the pervasive sense of a past that refused to be forgotten. The metallic, damp smell I had noticed earlier seemed stronger in these abandoned areas, an almost sickly sweet tang that I couldn't quite place. One afternoon, while snooping around Mr. Abernathy's empty apartment, a few of us managed to pry open a locked drawer in his desk. We found not grand mysteries, but mundane personal items. A half-written letter to his sister, a pressed flower, a small, worn, leather-bound journal. The journal, however, caught my eye. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, but more of a commonplace book where Mr. Abernathy jotted down observations, mathematical problems, and peculiar scientific theories that seemed well beyond the scope of school curriculum. Towards the back, in an increasingly frantic hand, were entries that sent a chill down my spine. "The resonance grows," one entry read, dated just days before his disappearance. "A frequency beyond human hearing, yet it vibrates through the very stone. It's coming from below. The old well? The foundations?" Another entry, scrawled almost illegibly, mentioned distortions in light and flickering auras around the oldest parts of the school, particularly the bell tower and the forgotten crypt beneath the chapel. Crypt? I had never known Blackwood Academy had a crypt. Most unsettling was the last entry, dated the day he vanished. "It calls. A perfect, silent note. The pull is undeniable. I must investigate the sentence ended abruptly, a faint smudge marring the page, as if the pen had been dropped mid-word. We stared at the journal, our young faces pale in the dim light filtering through the grimy window. It was clear then. Mr. Abernathy hadn't been recalled to family matters. He had been investigating something terrifying, something connected to the very fabric of Blackwood Academy itself. The metallic damp smell suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just damp earth. It was the smell of something ancient, something disturbed. The news of the journal spread quickly among our trusted circle of friends. It only intensified our fear, but also fueled a morbid curiosity. We decided we had to find out what Mr. Abernathy had been investigating. The old well, he mentioned, was near the edge of the rose garden, overgrown and rarely used. The bell tower was off-limits, the stairs leading to it deemed unsafe. And the crypt? That was the most intriguing and the most frightening. Our opportunity came during the dreaded Saturday inspection, a ritual where we were meant to clean our dormitories under the watchful eyes of prefects. Instead, while the prefects were busy, with the main hall a few of us slipped away. William, the tallest and strongest, managed to force open the rusted lock on the bell tower door. The stairs wound upwards, steep and narrow, the air thick with dust and the persistent metallic smell. As we climbed, a faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to fill the air, vibrating in our bones. It wasn't loud, but it was there, a deep, low thrum that seemed to emanate from the very stone. At the top, the bell itself, massive and silent, hung shrouded in cobwebs. But it was not the bell that drew our attention. On the floor, near a grimy window overlooking the forest, was a makeshift workstation. There were strange diagrams scratched into the dusty floor, lines connecting points, forming geometric shapes that seemed to twist and contort the space around them. And on a small rickety table, we found it. Miss Croft's missing history book. It lay open to a page detailing ancient megalithic structures and their purported mystical properties. Beside it, she had left a single neatly folded note. It was addressed to anyone who finds this. Her elegant handwriting, usually so composed, was slightly shaky. The hum, it's a resonance. Not natural. Mr. Abernathy was right. It's a locus. The energy. It draws from the earth itself. It's strongest in the oldest places, the places of deep ritual, the crypt. I believe it's the source. It's calling to me, a quiet, insistent melody. I feel compelled to understand. The last word was smudged, just like Abernathy's. And next to the note, almost obscured by the dust, was a small, ornate silver locket, one that Miss Croft always wore. It lay open, revealing a faded photograph of a young woman who must have been her mother. The hum in the tower seemed to intensify, a low, throbbing presence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Miss Croft had gone to the crypt. Mr. Abernathy had been investigating the same resonance. They weren't just gone. They had been drawn somewhere, by something. And it seemed the crypt, a place shrouded in mystery and likely connected to the school's very ancient foundations, was the key. Our investigation, initially born of boyish curiosity, had stumbled upon a terrifying truth. The hum, the metallic, smell, the disappearances. They were all connected. Blackwood Academy held a secret far older and more sinister than any of us could have imagined. And we, a group of frightened boys, were now standing on the precipice of uncovering it. The thought of what lay beneath, in that forgotten crypt, filled us with a dread that was almost too profound for our young minds to bear. Yet, a strange, desperate compulsion, born of fear and curiosity, was beginning to take hold. The silver locket lay cold and heavy in my palm, a tangible piece of Miss Croft's vanished life. The hum, that low, unsettling vibration, pulsed through the very floorboards of the bell tower, a silent yet deafening accusation. William, Edward, and the others, their faces pale and etched with a new kind of terror, stared at the note, then at me. We weren't just curious boys anymore. We were accidental detectives, burdened with a truth too heavy for our young shoulders. Miss Croft and Mr. Abernathy hadn't simply left. They had been drawn into Blackwood Academy's dark heart, down into the crypt. The unspoken question lingered. Would we be next, drawn by that insidious, silent call? The descent from the bell tower felt heavier than the climb. Each step down the creaking stairs amplified the chilling certainty that lay before us. We had to go to the crypt. It was a compulsion, a dark magnet pulling at our curiosity and fear, despite the profound dread it instilled. That evening, back in the dormitory, our usual boisterous energy was replaced by hushed whispers. Under the threadbare blankets, illuminated by a single flickering candle stolen from the common room, we planned. William, ever the pragmatic leader, insisted on careful preparation. We gathered what meager supplies we could: a few extra candles, a box of matches, a coil of rope borrowed from the groundskeeper's shed, and a rusty trowel that Edward had somehow unearthed. The biggest challenge was finding the crypt itself. Mr. Abernathy's journal hinted at it being beneath the chapel. Blackwood Academy's chapel was an old, austere building, rarely used except for mandatory Sunday services, its heavy oak doors almost always locked. It stood slightly apart from the main school building, its stained glass windows depicting stern, unsmiling saints. We knew the main entrance was guarded, but perhaps there was another way, a hidden passage, or a forgotten entrance from outside. The night we chose was moonless, a thick shroud of clouds muffling the sky, perfect for our clandestine expedition. The school, usually a bastion of faint light from the teachers' rooms, was largely dark, save for the occasional glimmer from a corridor lamp. The air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth, mingled with that persistent, metallic tang that now seemed to fill my very lungs. Our hearts hammered against our ribs like trapped birds as we crept down the dormitory stairs, each creak of the old wood sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. We moved like shadows, flitting through the familiar corridors that now felt alien and menacing. The portraits of stern-faced former headmasters seemed to watch us from the walls, their eyes following our every furtive movement. The hum, which had been subtle in the bell tower, began to assert itself more strongly. As we approached the chapel, it wasn't a sound one heard with ears, but one felt in the very marrow of one's bones, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the stone floor beneath our feet. It was the low, silent note Mr. Abernathy had written about, and Miss Croft had felt compelled by. Reaching the chapel, we found the main doors indeed locked and impenetrable. But William, ever resourceful, remembered old stories of a hidden tunnel used by monks centuries ago, connecting the chapel to the old monastery, ruins deeper in the forest, now just a pile of moss-covered stones. We searched the exterior walls, feeling along the rough stone for any irregularity. After what felt like an eternity, Edward's excited whisper broke the silence. "Here, a loose stone, hidden behind a thick curtain of ivy, almost completely. Swallowed by the encroaching forest was a section of the chapel's foundation where a single, unusually large stone seemed to shift. With the combined effort of all of us, straining and grunting in the darkness, we managed to dislodge it, revealing a narrow, gaping hole. The opening was just wide enough for a boy to squeeze through, and from within it, the metallic, damp smell, intensified, thick and cloying like old blood and rust. And the hum, it was no longer subtle. It was a pervasive vibration, a silent roar that made the ground beneath us tremble faintly. I was the smallest, so it was decided I would go first. My heart was a drum in my chest, but the strange compulsion to understand, to know, was stronger than my fear. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through the opening, my clothes scraping against the rough stone. I landed softly on a pile of loose earth, the air immediately colder, heavier. Behind me, William lowered a lit candle on a string. The dim light revealed a narrow, descending passage carved directly out of the earth, its walls rough and uneven. It smelled ancient, stagnant, a scent that prickled the back of my throat. The passage sloped steeply downwards, twisting and turning, becoming narrower in places. The hum was now a constant, almost physical pressure against my eardrums, vibrating through my very teeth. It felt as though I was descending into the very core of the earth, into a place forgotten by time. We navigated the darkness carefully, the single candle casting long dancing shadows that played tricks on our eyes, making stalactites look like grasping hands and fissures like leering faces. After what felt like an hour, though it was likely only minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber. This was unmistakably the crypt. The air was still, heavy, and thick with the metallic scent, but now overlaid with a faint, almost sickly sweet floral note, like funerary flowers left to rot. The walls were lined with alcoves, some empty, some containing ancient crumbling. Stone sarcophagi, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries. No names were visible, only faint, indecipherable carvings. This was older than the school itself, perhaps a forgotten burial ground upon which Blackwood Academy had been built. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the feeble candlelight, was not a tomb, but something else entirely. It was a large, circular stone plinth, intricately carved with the same twisting geometric symbols we had seen scratched on the bell tower floor. And resting upon it, shimmering faintly with an ethereal, almost invisible light, was a large, irregular crystal. It wasn't a crystal in the geological sense, not quartz or amethyst. It was dark, almost black. Yet it seemed to absorb and refract the candlelight in impossible ways, creating fleeting glimpses of colors that didn't exist in our spectrum. And from this crystal, the hum emanated, stronger than anywhere else, a silent, powerful vibration that made my whole body ache. As we approached, drawn by an irresistible fascination, I noticed something else. Around the base of the plinth, scattered amidst the dust, were personal items. A pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, undeniably Mr. Abernathy's. A small, neatly folded handkerchief, embroidered with the initial E, Miss Croft's. And then a more recent addition. A small silver pocket watch, its chain broken, its glass shattered. It was Mr. Finch's. He hadn't just disappeared. He had been drawn here, too. A cold dread seeped into my bones, chilling me far more than the crypt's damp air. This wasn't just a place of ancient burial. It was a focal point, a receiver, or perhaps a transmitter of the strange resonance. The crystal pulsed, softly, silently, and as it did, I felt a peculiar sensation, like a gentle tugging at my very essence, a quiet invitation to step closer, to understand. It was the call. It was what had drawn the teachers, and it was starting to call to us. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, a taste on my tongue. We had found the heart of Blackwood Academy's secret, and it was far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. The crystal shimmered, and I felt a dizzying pull, a silent melody echoing in my mind, promising knowledge, promising oblivion. We were too close, far too close. The silent melody emanating from the dark crystal in the crypt was no longer a gentle tug. It was a commanding pull, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones and echoed in the hollows of my mind. It promised revelation, understanding, a profound truth, but also whispered of an inevitable, terrifying oblivion. William and Edward, standing beside me, seemed to feel it too. Their eyes, wide and fixed on the shimmering crystal, held a mixture of awe and dawning horror. We were mesmerized, held captive by the ancient pulse of something beyond our comprehension. The metallic, damp scent, now mingled with that sickly sweet floral note, was overpowering, pressing in on us from all sides. "We need to go," Edward whispered, his voice hoarse as if speaking required immense effort. He was the first to break the spell, shaking his head slightly, as if dislodging cobwebs. William, always the most practical, nodded, his jaw tight. His hand reached out, not towards the crystal, but towards the scattering of personal items around its base. Mr. Abernathy's spectacles, Miss Croft's handkerchief, Mr. Finch's shattered watch. He carefully scooped them up as if gathering fragments of lost souls. It was a gesture of respect, a silent acknowledgement of the terrible fate that had befallen our teachers. The very act of turning away from the crystal felt like breaking a powerful enchantment. The pull resisted, a silent shriek in my mind, urging me back. But William's firm grip on my arm was enough to ground me. We scrambled back through the narrow, twisting passage, the single candle flickering wildly, casting our distorted shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The metallic smell seemed to chase us, clinging to our clothes and hair. The hum, though receding, still resonated deep within us, a ghostly echo that would linger long after we had left the crypt. Emerging from the hidden entrance behind the ivy, gasping for the crisp, cold night air, felt like being reborn. The silence of the forest, once menacing, was now a comforting blanket after the overwhelming resonance of the crypt. We resecured the loose stone, covering it once more with ivy, as if attempting to bury the terrible secret we had unearthed. The walk back to the dormitory was a blur of hurried footsteps and stunned silence. The events of the crypt had robbed us of our voices, leaving us with only the chilling echoes of that silent hum and the indelible image of the pulsating dark crystal. Back in the relative safety of our dormitory, huddled under the blankets, the stolen candle once again casting its feeble glow, we laid out the retrieved items. Each object told a silent, tragic story. Mr. Abernathy's spectacles, lenses still smudged, suggested a man interrupted mid-thought, perhaps peering at the very crystal that consumed him. Miss Croft's handkerchief, with its delicate E, spoke of a refined spirit drawn into an unrefined horror. And Mr. Finch's shattered pocket watch, stopped at precisely 3:17, hinted at a struggle, a moment of final futile resistance against an irresistible force. The hum, now a phantom sensation, still throbbed faintly behind my eyes, a constant reminder. We understood now. The teachers hadn't vanished, they had been absorbed. The crystal was not merely an object, it was something alive, something that drew life, that consumed intelligence and essence. It was a silent predator, rooted deep beneath Blackwood Academy. The school wasn't just built on ancient burial grounds. It was built upon, or perhaps around, something far more ancient and terrifying. The legends of the old monastery, the deep-rooted, trees of the Blackwood forest, the very stone of the school, it all felt connected to this malevolent crystal. The realization settled over us, cold and heavy, stripping away the last vestiges of our childhood innocence. We were living above a monstrosity, and it was slowly, subtly, claiming everyone. But what could we do? We were just boys. Who would believe us? Mr. Thorne, the headmaster, clearly knew something, or suspected, but he was covering it up, maintaining a facade of normalcy for the sake of the school's reputation, or perhaps out of his own deep-seated fear. The local constable had been easily dismissed. We were alone in our terrible knowledge. The next few days were a blur of heightened anxiety. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat. Every creak of the old building sounded like a prelude to another disappearance. The teachers who remained, unaware that we knew their predecessors' fate, continued their grim decline. Mr. Silas, the English master, grew increasingly gaunt, his booming voice reduced to a rasp. He would pace his classroom, murmuring lines of poetry that seemed to have a morbid resonance, and now remains that we but find the corpse and bury it in oblivion. He looked directly at me one afternoon, his eyes hollow and distant, as if seeing not a boy, but a ghost of what I might become. The scent of metallic dampness seemed to follow him like a personal cloud. Our fear, though constant, also hardened into a grim determination. We couldn't just sit by and wait to be next. We had to expose this. But how? Talking to Mr. Thorne was out of the question. He was part of the cover-up. Telling the other boys would only cause panic. We needed proof, undeniable evidence that would force the outside world to acknowledge the horror lurking beneath Blackwood Academy. That night, as the moon once again hid behind thick clouds, William formulated a desperate plan. It involved the headmaster's office. Mr. Thorne was a meticulous record keeper. If he was concealing something, there might be evidence there. Letters, documents, anything that hinted at the school's dark history or his knowledge of the disappearances. It was a risky gamble, far more dangerous than slipping into a crypt. The headmaster's office was a sacred, forbidden space, and getting caught would mean expulsion, or worse. But the alternative was waiting to be consumed by the silent call of the crystal. We chose the dead of night, after the last lamp in the teacher's wing had been extinguished. The school was a cavern of whispering shadows and creaking timbers. We moved slowly, our bare feet silent on the cold stone floors, our breaths held tight in our chests. The faint hum, a low background presence now, seemed to guide us, mocking us with its omnipresent vibration. Reaching Mr. Thorne's office door felt like crossing an invisible boundary into enemy territory. It was locked, of course, but William, with surprising dexterity, produced a bent wire he had fashioned from an old clothes hanger, and after several agonizing minutes of fumbling, the lock clicked open with a soft, ominous sound. We slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind us, plunging the room into near-total darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight filtering through the tall window. The office smelled of pipe tobacco, old paper, and something distinctly coppery, like old blood. Mr. Thorne's desk, a massive oak edifice, dominated the room. We lit our single candle, shielding its flame with cupped hands. The flickering light danced across shelves filled with leather-bound ledgers, disciplinary records, and official-looking documents. We worked quickly, methodically, our hearts pounding against our ribs. We searched through drawers, rifled through filing cabinets, our hands growing grimy with dust and the faint, persistent metallic scent that seemed to cling to everything in this accursed school. It was Edward who found it. Tucked away in a false bottom of the largest desk drawer, beneath a stack of old attendance registers, was a heavy, iron-bound ledger. Unlike the other mundane records, this book was ancient, its pages brittle and yellowed, its binding worn smooth, with age. Its title, embossed in faded gold, read, Chronicles of Blackwood Academy, Founders' Records. It was a historical account, tracing the school's origins not back to its purported establishment in the 17th century, but far, far earlier. As we flipped through the brittle pages, the candle trembling in my hand, a chilling narrative began to unfold. It spoke of Blackwood not as a mere school, but as a site of ancient significance, a place built upon what was described as a locus of terrestrial energy. The earliest entries, written in a cramped, archaic script, detailed rituals performed by cloaked figures, custodians who sought to manage and contain the great hum emanating from beneath the earth. There were mentions of sacrifices, not of animals, but of knowledge, of insight, of certain individuals who were given to the locus to maintain balance. The language was veiled, almost poetic, but the underlying meaning was horrifyingly clear. The teachers hadn't been chosen at random. They were scholars, seekers of knowledge, perhaps drawn by the very intellectual curiosity that had defined them. The crystal was feeding, not on their physical bodies, but on their minds, their essence. The ledger chronicled generations of headmasters, not as educators, but as a lineage of these custodians, their role to ensure the locus remained contained, its influence controlled. And then a recent entry, dated barely a decade ago, stood out in Mr. Thorne's familiar hand. The resonance grows stronger. The containment is failing. More are called. The balance shifts. This wasn't just a school. It was a prison, a cage, built around something unspeakable. And the cage was failing. The teachers hadn't just vanished. They were a terrible, ancient sacrifice. And now we, the boys, had stumbled upon the truth. The silent hum from the crypt was a song of hunger, and Blackwood Academy was its feeding ground. We had found our proof, but it came with a terrifying realization. We were not just witnesses, we were potentially the next offering.